In a world overflowing with noise, shallow takes, and information that evaporates the moment you hear it, Selenius Media exists for one purpose: to give you depth. Whether the subject is philosophy, psychology, history, science, artificial intelligence, literature, or the shape of the future, every series we publish is built on one idea: that thinking clearly is a form of survival. Our catalog spans dozens of long-form, story-driven shows. From Western moral philosophy for beginners to pioneers of psychology and psychiatry, from AI, an uncertain future, to the classical music giants. Each series is crafted to give you more than facts. It gives you the context, the conflict, and the human meaning behind the ideas that shaped our world. If you enjoy this program, explore the rest of our library. Every show is designed to stand alone, but together they form a larger project, a guided tour of the forces: intellectual, emotional, political, technological, that built the world we live in and the world we're about to enter. Visit the Selenius Media channel to discover new series, follow your favorites, and support the work that allows us to create long-form, high-fidelity educational storytelling. And please leave comments if you enjoy our shows. Now, let's begin. On a warm afternoon in the late Roman Republic, in a modest house somewhere near Rome, a man sits at a wooden table, writing verse about atoms. Outside, the streets are noisy with politics, senators scheming in marble halls, generals chasing glory, crowds in the forum roaring for bread and spectacle. Inside, this man is engaged in something quieter, but in his view, much more urgent. He is trying to free human beings from terror of the gods, of death, of fate, by showing them that everything in the universe is made of small, unseen particles moving through empty space. His name is Titus Lucretius Carus, and the poem taking shape under his hand, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, will become the most powerful poetic expression of Epicurean moral philosophy that survives from antiquity. We know very little about Lucretius the man. Later sources claim he went mad and killed himself under the influence of a love potion, but that story is almost certainly slander or legend. There are no colorful courtroom speeches, no dramatic suicides like Seneca's, no political careers to document. What we truly have is the poem itself, 6 long books of Latin hexameters that mix careful argument with vivid, sometimes shocking imagery. Through that poem, Lucretius presents a complete vision of the cosmos and of the good life, one that rejects divine providence, denies an afterlife, and locates the core of morality in our capacity to live free from unnecessary fear and pain. To understand what Lucretius is doing, you have to go back to Epicurus, the Greek philosopher whose ideas he adopts and develops. Epicurus taught that everything that exists is made of atoms, indivisible, eternal bits of matter moving through the void. Nothing arises from nothing. Nothing dissolves into nothing. Things merely come together and fall apart as atoms combine and separate. The gods, if they exist at all, are themselves composed of atoms and live in perfect, detached tranquility. They do not create the world, interfere in human affairs, or hand down laws. There is no cosmic judge, no divine providence, no eternal punishment or reward. The human soul is material too, dissolving at death along with the body. All that really matters to us is pleasure and pain, understood not as wild indulgence and torment, but as the presence or absence of disturbance in body and mind. By the time Lucretius writes, probably in the 1st century B.C.E., Epicurean philosophy has been in the world for 2 centuries. It has adherents in Athens, in Asia Minor, and now in Rome. But in Roman culture, it is often misunderstood and despised. Many hear pleasure and think of gluttony and debauchery. Pious traditionalists hear no divine providence and call it atheism. Conservative fathers worry that Epicurean teaching will sap their sons' courage and civic virtue. Lucretius wants to correct these misunderstandings and, more deeply, to offer Epicurus's philosophy as a kind of medicine for a sick society. That medical metaphor is not casual. Again and again, Lucretius calls philosophy a remedy for the disease of the soul. People suffer from anxieties about death, superstition about gods, insatiable desires for wealth and honor, envy, jealousy, and rage. These are not just unpleasant feelings. They drive people to cruelty, war, and self-destruction. Epicurean physics, atoms and void, is not a cold scientific curiosity for him. It is the bitter medicine that, once swallowed, can cure us of those fears. To make it more palatable, he says, he coats the rill of the cup with the honey of poetry. A child will not drink a drug if it tastes foul, so he mixes hard doctrine with seductive lines. He opens the poem with a hymn to Venus, which at first seems surprising. Here is the supposed atheist invoking a goddess, but Venus in the poem is not a literal divine person who intervenes in history. She is the personification of generative power in nature, of the force that makes living things come into being and seek one another. By praising her, Lucretius is praising life itself, fertility, peace. He imagines her calming Mars, god of war, so that he may rest in her arms and allow the world a reprieve from conflict. It is a deeply Roman image, war tamed by love, used to introduce a philosophy that wants to replace fear and aggression with understanding and calm. After this lyrical beginning, he turns immediately to first principles. He insists that nothing comes from nothing. If it did, anything could arise out of anything. Plants from desert, animals from stone, rain out of clear sky without clouds. But observation shows that every change has conditions. Crops from seeds, children from parents, storms from patterns of air and water. Likewise, nothing disappears into absolute nothingness. When a tree falls and rots, its matter does not vanish. It changes form, feeding insects, enriching soil. From this, he concludes that there must be some underlying, indestructible stuff of which things are made. That stuff, following Democritus and Epicurus, he calls atoms. They are too small to see, too solid to cut, too durable to destroy. They differ in shape, weight, and combinations, and those differences explain the qualities of things we experience. The hardness of iron, the sweetness of honey, the smell of the sea. Between atoms is void, empty space that allows motion. Without void, nothing could move. Without atoms, nothing could exist. This picture, atoms falling, colliding, forming bodies, might feel abstract, but for Lucretius, it has a powerful ethical purpose. If everything that happens can be explained by the motions and interactions of atoms, then we do not have to attribute earthquakes, plagues, or lightning bolts to angry gods. The world becomes a natural system, not a theater of divine punishment. He knows that many will object. If the motions of atoms are necessary, does that not make everything predetermined, including human actions? Here he adds a famous Epicurean twist, the swerve, or clinamen. If atoms simply fell straight down through the void, parallel to one another, they would never meet. There would be no collisions, no combinations, no world. So, he says, at unpredictable times and places, an atom swerves slightly from its path. That tiny, lawless deviation allows atoms to collide and form complex structures. It also opens, he suggests, a space for human freedom. If everything were strictly determined by preceding causes, our sense of choice would be an illusion. The swerve, though physically small, matters morally. It keeps us from being mere puppets in a cosmic machine. Throughout the poem, he applies his atomism to phenomena that people have traditionally explained by myth. Thunder is not Jupiter hurling bolts in anger. It is the clash of clouds and air. Earthquakes are not Neptune's rage, but shifts in underground caverns and flows. Plagues are not punishments for impiety. They spread by unseen seeds, like dust or pollen, carried by air or water. Love is not an arrow shot by Cupid. It is a disturbance in the soul, caused by looks, touches, memories, all grounded in the movements of extremely fine soul atoms. Nowhere is the ethical purpose of this more visible than in his treatment of death. For Lucretius, fear of death is perhaps the deepest and most destructive of human anxieties. In public, people may boast that they do not fear the end, but in secret, he thinks, they cling to life even when it has become joyless, because they imagine death as a dark continuation of suffering or as a loss of something essential. That fear drives them to hoard wealth, to cling to status, to betray others, to commit injustices that poison their own minds. Against this, Lucretius advances the core Epicurean thesis. Death is nothing to us. While we exist, death is not present. When death is present, we do not exist. There is no subject left to experience being dead. The soul, made of fine atoms, disperses with the body. The conscious you does not travel anywhere. It simply ceases. There is no hell, no eternal torture, no afterlife court. The horrors that poets and priests have painted, the river Styx, the wheel of Ixion, the vulture gnawing at Titius's liver, are allegories for pains we inflict on ourselves here and now through guilt, fear, and uncontrolled desire. To strengthen this, he uses a simple but powerful comparison. Think of the eternity before you were born, he says. For infinite time, the world existed, and you did not. You are not tormented now by the thought of those ages. You do not grieve that you missed the Punic Wars or the founding of Rome. That non-existence does not trouble you. Death is just the same kind of nothingness on the other side. It will be no more painful or frightening than the time before your birth. If you can make that image real to yourself, he suggests, much of the sting of mortality goes away. Of course, someone might say, it is not the state of being dead that frightens me, but the loss of future pleasures. Lucretius acknowledges this, but he thinks we exaggerate how much we need. A life that has contained real joys, friendships, thoughts, and simple pleasures does not become better simply by stretching longer and longer. The person who has never learned to say enough will never be satisfied, whether they live 30 years or 300. Instead of craving indefinite extension, he counsels us to live in such a way that at any moment we could say, if life ended now, it would have been complete enough. This leads directly into his account of pleasure and the good. Epicurus had defined the highest pleasure as ataraxia, freedom from mental disturbance, along with a body free from intense pain. That does not mean lying in a warm bath forever. It means a stable state where you are not plagued by fear of gods or death. Not driven by endless craving for luxury or fame, not racked by physical agony. Lucretius repeats and dramatizes this picture. He draws sharp lines between natural and necessary desires for food, shelter, basic security, friendship, natural but unnecessary desires for rich food, fancy clothing, music, ornaments, and empty or vain desires for limitless wealth, domination over others, lasting glory. The wise person, in his view, satisfies the natural and necessary desires with simplicity, enjoys the second category cautiously when circumstances allow, and tries to extinguish the third as far as possible. An ordinary barley cake eaten in health among friends can be as pleasurable or more than a banquet weighed down with anxiety and rivalry. A small house that keeps out wind and rain is enough. A palace adds decoration, not true increase in well-being. Constant pursuit of status, riches, and power, far from making us happy, traps us in fear of loss, envy of rivals, emptiness once one goal is reached and another must be invented. Lucretius is writing this in a Rome where ambitious politicians are vying for power, armies are marching, fortunes are being made in war and finance. He describes with acid clarity the restless man who keeps changing his location, thinking that a different city, villa, or climate will bring peace. He goes to the country, then finds his boredom follows him. He rushes back to the city, then curses the noise. He takes ship to travel abroad, then feels trapped on board. Each man flees himself, Lucretius says, but does not escape. The problem is not where you are, but what beliefs and desires inhabit your mind. Without philosophical therapy, no external change will suffice. His vision of the good life is therefore modest and demanding at once. Modest because it makes do with simple pleasures: bread, water, a bit of wine, a garden, conversation, the contemplation of nature. Demanding because it asks us to uproot deeply ingrained fears and ambitions. It is easier in some ways to follow a strict moral code that promises heaven in exchange for sacrifice, than to undertake the quiet work of training desire, examining beliefs, and accepting mortality. The Epicurean sage does not become famous. He does not command armies or write laws. He cultivates a small circle of friends, reads, reflects, and tries to be a source of calm in a turbulent world. This does not mean Lucretius is indifferent to justice. He never advocates trampling others or ignoring their suffering. On the contrary, he sees cruelty, betrayal, and violence as disastrous for the perpetrator's peace of mind, as well as the victim's situation. The person who lies, cheats, or murders cannot, if he has any human feeling at all, avoid inner torment, fear of discovery, remorse, paranoia, the constant strain of pretending. At the same time, he refuses to ground morality in divine commands or cosmic laws. There is no celestial ledger balancing good deeds and bad. The reason to act justly is that humans living together in mutual trust and moderation have a far better chance of attaining tranquility than humans living in a storm of fear and hatred. You can hear here a different tone from, say, a Stoic or a Christian moralist. A Stoic will tell you that virtue is the only true good and must be pursued even if it brings pain, because the harmony of the rational soul with the rational order of the cosmos is what matters. A Christian theologian will tell you that the highest good lies in loving and obeying God, even if this means martyrdom. Lucretius says, the point is to live well as a mortal animal in a natural world, and living well means managing pleasure and pain intelligently. For yourself and those around you, there is no extra cosmic scoreboard. For some, this will sound flat, as if something essential is missing. No ultimate justice, no transcendent meaning. Lucretius anticipates this objection. He knows that many people cling to myths of divine order because they cannot bear the thought that the universe is indifferent. His response is to say that clinging to illusions does not truly help. Fear of hell, for instance, may restrain some crimes, but it also fills countless lives with dread, paralyzes curiosity, and gives priestly authorities enormous power to manipulate guilt. A belief in providence may comfort some, but it may also lead others to accept injustice as part of God's plan instead of fighting preventable suffering. Facing the truth, he insists, is both more dignified and more useful. If we accept that the universe is not arranged for our sake, that we are temporary conglomerations of atoms in a vast, ongoing dance, we can stop demanding impossible guarantees. We can stop asking, "Why me?" as if earthquakes, diseases, or accidents ought to strike someone else. We can grieve losses without feeling that they are evidence of cosmic betrayal. We can direct our energy toward what is actually in our power: how we treat others, how we order our desires, how we use the brief time we have. There is a passage near the end of the poem where he describes the great plague of Athens. Borrowing from Thucydides, the city is ravaged, bodies pile up, families are torn apart, social norms collapse. Lucretius does not attribute the plague to sin or divine anger. He treats it as a natural event, horrific but not morally meaningful in itself. The moral dimension lies in how people respond. Some abandon basic decency. Others show courage and care. By placing even extreme suffering within a naturalistic frame, he invites us to see ethics as our human response to conditions we did not choose, not as obedience to a supernatural script. Historically, Lucretius's poem did not transform Roman morals. The Republic slid into civil war. Strong men like Caesar and then emperors like Augustus took control. Epicureanism remained one of several philosophical sects, competing with Stoicism, academic skepticism, and various religious cults. Later Christian writers attacked Epicureans as godless and hedonistic. For centuries after the fall of Rome, De Rerum Natura was rarely copied. It survived in a few monastic libraries, its atomism and irreligion quietly at odds with official doctrine. In the 15th century, a humanist book hunter rediscovered a manuscript, and the poem began to circulate again among scholars. Its vision of a world without divine governance, of nature as atoms in motion, helped prepare the ground for modern scientific and secular thinking. Early modern philosophers and scientists who argued that nature runs according to laws rather than miracles often did so with Lucretian echoes in their minds. In debates about whether morality needs God to make sense, his voice, insisting that a good human life can be grounded in our shared vulnerability and capacity for pleasure and pain, returned with new relevance. For your story of Western moral philosophy, Lucretius occupies a crucial place. He is the ancient poet of a fully naturalistic ethic. No providence, no immortal soul, no ultimate cosmic justice, only human beings trying to live without fear in a material universe. He forces the question that later thinkers, from Hobbes to Hume to contemporary secular ethicists, will keep revisiting. Can we make sense of right and wrong, good and evil, without appealing to a divine lawgiver or a built-in moral order of nature? He answers yes, and offers as his criterion not obedience, but the cultivation of undisturbed, mutually respectful life. There is another side to Lucretius's moral vision that is easy to overlook if we focus only on the denial of gods and afterlife, his emphasis on friendship and community. Epicurus himself had founded a small philosophical community in a garden outside Athens, where women and even former slaves were welcomed as students. The point was to create a way of living together that embodied the values of the philosophy: equality of regard, frankness in speech, mutual support, and shared enjoyment of simple things. Lucretius, writing in a different city and language, carries this spirit into Rome. His poem is addressed to a friend, Memmius, whom he wishes to free from ambition and anxiety. Again and again, he imagines philosophy as something practiced not in isolation, but among companions who remind one another of what truly matters. In that sense, his ethics is not narrowly individualistic. Yes, each person must examine their own fears and desires, but the conditions that help a person reach ataraxia are partly social: a circle of trustworthy friends, relative security from violence, freedom from grinding poverty. Lucretius does not offer a blueprint for political reform the way later thinkers like Hobbes or Rawls will, yet he is not indifferent to the shape of the city. Laws and customs that keep people in perpetual insecurity or drive them into pointless competition undermine the very tranquility he prizes. If we take his ideals seriously, they point toward a society that values leisure for thought and conversation, limits extremes of wealth and power, and refuses to use terror as a tool of control. It is striking to compare him here with the Stoics, whose great Roman representatives, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, also counseled detachment from fear and from enslaving desire. The Stoic tells you that what matters is inner virtue, that externals like health, wealth, and reputation are indifferents because they lie beyond your control. Lucretius does not go that far. He knows that persistent physical pain and extreme destitution make tranquility almost impossible. His goal is not to make you invulnerable to misfortune by sheer willpower, but to minimize the avoidable miseries created by false beliefs and unnecessary cravings. Where, the Stoic says, follow reason in accord with nature's law. The Epicurean poet says, understand nature so you can live within your limits, enjoying what is possible and letting go of what is not. Set against later Christian moral thought, Lucretius's differences are equally sharp. Christian ethics will center on love of God and neighbor, obedience to divine commandments, hope for resurrection and judgment. Sacrifice, suffering, and humility can be given positive value when endured for the sake of Christ. Lucretius has no place for redemptive suffering. Pain is bad, full stop. If it cannot be avoided, it should be faced with as much calm as possible, but it is never a path to a higher good beyond this world. Charity, in a Christian sense, is replaced by a more modest but still real gentleness. Treat others decently because you share the same fragile condition and because cruelty rebounds into your own mind as turmoil. In modern debates, echoes of Lucretius appear whenever someone defends a secular, this-worldly foundation for ethics. When a contemporary philosopher argues that we can build moral norms out of facts about human well-being, vulnerability, and interdependence, without invoking God or a cosmic purpose, that is a Lucretian move. When someone insists that fear of hell is a bad basis for morality because it distorts motives and can be manipulated, the ancient Epicurean critique is alive again. Even the familiar idea that much religious terror comes from a kind of story we tell ourselves about death and judgment owes something to the long afterlife of his poem. At the same time, there are limits to what Lucretius can offer us. He lived in a world without modern technology, global markets, or industrial capitalism. He did not have to think about climate change, algorithmic manipulation, or nuclear weapons. His counsel to retreat into a small circle of friends and cultivate private tranquility may seem, to some, inadequate in the face of large-scale injustices and planetary crises. Later moral philosophers will ask whether we are not obliged to do more than seek personal peace, whether justice requires organized, sometimes costly action to change structures, not just beliefs. Lucretius does not answer those questions. he belongs to a time when the main enemies he saw were superstition and political ambition, not systems that span continents. Still, his basic insights endure. Fear of death, of divine punishment, of social humiliation remains one of the deepest drivers of human cruelty. Unchecked desire for wealth and status still destroys lives. The ability to find contentment in enough, to relish simple pleasures, to accept mortality without denial, and to treat others with steady kindness rather than frantic need. These remain, by almost any standard, marks of a life well lived. In presenting a picture of such a life rooted in a purely natural world, Lucretius carved out a space in Western thought that no later wave of faith or skepticism has fully erased. For a listener moving through the centuries in your series, arriving at Lucretius after the Stoics and before the rise of Christian moral theology is like stepping into a clear, bright courtyard between high, ornate buildings. On one side, grand systems of virtue and cosmic reason. On the other, vast cathedrals of sin and salvation. In the middle, this Roman poet quietly lays out a table with bread, olives, and wine, invites a few friends to sit, and says, "Everything is made of atoms in motion. The gods, if they exist, are serene and do not bother with us. Death is the end, so let us stop terrifying ourselves and one another, and see what good we can make of the time we have."
Midnight rails under silver moon, dusty boots on a winding road. A shadow's the only friend I've known since she packed up and let me go. Empty whiskey bottle on the seat, her laugh still echoes in my bones. Saddle's heavy with memories. I ride alone where the wind still blows. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Sunrise paints the horizon gold, but it don't warm a lonesome soul. Every town I pass feels half her size. Every trail's haunted by goodbye. I whisper prayers to open skies, hoping someday my heart'll find a brand new path beyond the pain, where broken hearts can heal in time. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be. nowhere else to be.